The night the porch light spilled across the cracked step, I thought I had done the simplest, clearest thing in the world. I had opened a door. When my mother died, she left me a small house on a quiet street. It was the kind of place that held ordinary things: an old calendar stuck in the pantry, a rose bush that struggled every spring, a dent in the banister from the time Henry learned to carry a suitcase. My husband and I turned it into a rental. It was paid off. The rent paid the taxes, the insurance, the repairs, and gave us a little breathing room. For years it sat in the background of our lives, tidy and stubborn, doing what houses do, holding the past and waiting. 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. Then the three of them, Henry, Kyle, and Anne-Marie, needed something different. We had been friends with Sam and George since college. We married our old classmates, watched those children tumble into the world and then into adulthood, and let our lives braid together in predictable ways. Henry, our son, was 24 and buried in grad school readings and part-time jobs. Kyle, Sam's son, was 23 and juggling shifts with lectures. Anne-Marie, George's daughter, had just finished her degree and landed her first proper job. For a while, the three of them shared a cramped apartment in a part of town that made me tense whenever I drove past. They valued independence. I valued the quiet fear that keeps you awake when someone else's safety feels fragile. A break-in 2 blocks over, a fistfight in the stairwell at 1 a.m, the kind of repeated small scares that stop you trusting a place. Those incidents made me stop watching from the edges. The apartment was affordable because of risk. I kept picturing my kids at a window, too afraid to call for help. One cold evening, my husband and I sat at our kitchen table and tried to name the calculus of what we would do. "Offer them the house," I said. "No rent," he added. "They'll split utilities. We'll have a lease. We'll set aside money for damages." It felt like a clear ledger. Safety for them, a little extra work for us, and no profit. It felt like mercy with structure. So I offered it. I walked through the rooms, pictured them setting up a couch, thought of the rose bush in spring, and sent the message. I did not call George first. In my head, the facts stacked cleanly. The kids were adults. The house was mine. It was paid off. I imagined a practical solution to a pressing worry. Sam and his wife were instantly relieved. Henry texted, then sat in my kitchen with cheeks flushed and said, "We can't believe this." Anne-Marie cried in the doorway when she looked at the little garden and said, "It feels like home." Then George called. He sounded like a father who had rehearsed disappointment. "I wanted her to pay rent," he said. "If she pays rent, she learns responsibility. I wanted to teach her that." His words landed like a stone I had not noticed in my shoe. For him, rent was not merely a transaction, it was a daily lesson plan. Charging rent meant teaching sacrifice and budgeting and consequence. By offering the house without rent, he said, I had removed an important lesson. I tried to explain the safeguards. There would be a lease. They would split utilities. Guests could not stay long without unanimous consent. Missed payments would count as a breach that could lead to eviction. I had earmarked a repair fund. We had insurance. This was not indulgence. It was a scaffold designed to let them practice adulthood in a safer place. He heard one phrase, "No rent," and the world tilted. What followed was not a shouting match, but a slow, stubborn cooling. Hugs grew more formal. Dinner conversations shortened. Invitations started to be accepted with a hesitancy that felt new and brittle. Sam tried to mediate. My husband said we should have called George as a courtesy. He wasn't against the plan, only the omission. I understood his point. Friendships that last decades accumulate small rituals of respect and consultation. I also understood the urgency of a small house and 3 young people living in a place where screaming in the stairwell was a nightly possibility. Inside the house, life proved messy and honest. They made mistakes, the kind that teach. Kyle left a pile of dishes one weekend that became a neighborhood scent. Henry missed a utility due date. Anne-Marie threw a birthday party that got out of hand, and a window ended up broken. Each incident required a straightforward response: repair, talk, restitution. The lease became a tool we used rather than a paper for show. We reminded them when bills were late, mediated when chores fell into dispute, and enforced consequences equitably when they were needed. The rule applied to my son as much as to their friends. Fairness mattered. One evening, a utilities notice arrived that made us all stop mid-toast. We spread the bills on the coffee table, shocking when seen in print, and the plan felt suddenly very real. Kyle admitted his weekend shift had been canceled and he was short. Henry confessed he'd misread a due date. Anne-Marie scraped together a portion and then did something that settled the room. She proposed a rotating payment schedule and volunteered to set up an online shared account so no one could forget again. We sat for an hour sorting expense categories and assigning dates. It was clumsy and awkward and intensely adult. It was also honest. After that night, they stopped avoiding the bills and started owning them. My husband watched that transformation with quiet satisfaction, though he still said later he wished I had called George first. He argued for the small courtesies that grease long friendships, while I argued for urgent safety. The debate didn't end, but the practical wins softened the sting. There were other tests. When the boiler failed in January and the repair cost more than their usual monthly utilities, there was a panic call at dinner time. They rang me, voices tight with apologies. We agreed they would cover the excess over 2 months, and I arranged a trusted plumber. The mechanic taught Kyle how to bleed a radiator. Kyle later tightened a valve himself and, with a small proud grin, explained to Henry what he had done. Practical competence crept in where fear had once lived. When the window crashed after the misjudged birthday, they organized a cleanup and raised money for the repair. I matched what they gathered and used the moment to remind them what it means to take responsibility in a neighborhood that will notice and remember. Those were the moments the house was doing what I had hoped, sheltering without indulging. Anne-Marie surprised me most. She downloaded a budgeting app, started tracking expenses, and began texting color-coded spreadsheets. She compared phone plans, negotiated a rota at work, and set aside a small emergency fund. She called me once, voice bright with a new kind of confidence, to ask whether refinancing a part of her student loan made sense. She wrote, "I can breathe here," under a photograph of the rose bush she'd potted. Those short messages settled my second-guessing more effectively than any lecture could. The social cost, though, was real. George's visits became measured. He would come by with casseroles and stand in the doorway longer than seemed natural, watching them argue about dishes and then make up over coffee. That distance was the price of my omission. I apologized for not calling, and he accepted the apology with civility, but kept his distance. Our friendship changed texture, less warm, more careful, and sometimes I resented the price. Sometimes I understood it. We reviewed the lease annually at that kitchen table. Those meetings were not ceremonial. They were a forum for negotiation. One year, Anne-Marie suggested they contribute a small monthly amount to a shared emergency fund. That modest proposal felt like a milestone. Another year, Kyle proposed a shared chore calendar app that cut arguments by half. The act of sitting down and renegotiating expectations taught them negotiation, planning, and the humility of shared life. I kept the arrangement transparent. I showed George the lease, the repair fund, the budgeting tools. He listened and asked hard questions. He never fully embraced the idea, but he stopped sending articles about character built by rent and began to check in on repairs and bills. Sometimes he would stand a little closer in the doorway, and once he even praised Kyle for fixing the loose step. The bridge between us did not mend overnight, but it did not collapse either. When I tally the outcomes, the ledger tilts toward what I hoped. Henry is learning to balance school and work, Kyle is gaining practical household skills, Anne-Marie is learning to prioritize savings without the constant fear of street-level danger. I kept them safe and held them accountable. I learned that kindness often requires repair work on relationships, and that courtesy is a small, powerful currency I should not overlook. If I could do one thing differently, it would be small and human. I would make the phone call to George before I offered the house. Courtesy is free, and its cost is nothing compared to the ease it buys in a decades-long friendship. But as for opening the door, I would do that again. Because seeing them move through the quiet rooms that once belonged to my mother with more confidence than they carried into that old apartment is a clear answer to whatever regret tugs at me. Sometimes doing the right thing means negotiating the cost to human relationships afterward. I would make the call next time. I would still open the door. She hadn't meant to stay awake that long again. But when pain makes a home inside your body, time becomes something you fight instead of follow. The clock said 4:47 a.m. when her eyes finally closed. It wasn't peaceful sleep, just exhaustion that finally dragged her under. The room was silent, the air still. For once, she thought she might make it to noon without interruption. Then the door creaked open. A thin blade of light cut across the carpet, followed by her husband's voice. "Hey," he whispered, standing halfway inside the bedroom. Her heart sank. It was always the same. "What?" she muttered, her voice raw from too little rest. "Do you know where the clean towels are?" 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. That was it. Not an emergency. Not anything that couldn't wait. She didn't even respond. He lingered, waiting for an answer that never came, before quietly shutting the door. She sighed, turning over. Her body ached, her mind buzzing. It would take at least 20 minutes for sleep to return. And when it finally did, the door opened again. This time it was about the mail, then about breakfast, then about nothing at all. He'd always been like this, restless in the mornings, full of energy. He went to bed around midnight and woke by 7. She envied him for that, even loved him for it once. But lately, his morning cheerfulness had started to feel like cruelty. Her own nights were endless. The chronic pain made it impossible to rest before her body was truly ready. So she drifted off at 4, sometimes 5 or 6, and slept until noon if she was lucky. They lived on different schedules, as if trapped in opposite time zones. He'd get up as she was just falling asleep. She'd told him before that these constant interruptions felt intentional. "It's like you're trying to annoy me into waking up," she'd said once. He had laughed, waving it off. "That's not how I mean it, so it's fine." But it wasn't fine. It was slowly driving her mad. Every morning the same pattern repeated. She'd feel the cool air shift, hear the hinges creak, sense him hovering at the doorway. Sometimes he didn't even speak. He'd just stand there, watching her as though waiting for her to stir. She'd open one eye and glare, but he never seemed to take the hint. After days of this, she began to dread mornings entirely. Her heart would race at the smallest sound in the hallway. The space that once felt comforting, shared, familiar, had become suffocating. Even the bedroom no longer belonged to her. And then came the day that pushed her past the edge. It started like the others. She had fallen asleep around 5, her body heavy, her mind too tired to think. The world outside was quiet, but just a few hours later, a strange noise filled the air, a deep whirring hum followed by a dull thud, then another and another. She opened her eyes in confusion. The sound grew louder, closer. Something mechanical bumped against the bedpost, then the wall, the Roomba. Her husband had sent the Roomba into the room. She sat up, hair tangled, pulse pounding. The little robot roared around like a tiny beast, colliding with furniture, spinning aimlessly across the floor. It hit the nightstand, the closet door, the leg of the bed. Each impact was a small explosion in her skull. She pulled a pillow over her head, desperate for silence. But the sound wouldn't stop. The vacuum thudded and clicked and whined until she couldn't stand it anymore. When she stumbled into the kitchen 40 minutes later, bleary-eyed and furious. He was pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Did you seriously send the Roomba into the room while I was sleeping?" she snapped. He looked up, genuinely surprised. "Yeah, I thought it could clean while you were asleep." "I was asleep." He frowned, as though she were being unreasonable. "I didn't think it'd bother you that much." She stared at him, speechless. Something inside her, something patient, forgiving, endlessly understanding, cracked. She turned and walked back to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. For a moment she just stood there, listening to the faint buzz of the house. Then she looked at the doorknob. Maybe tomorrow, she thought, I'll lock door after he gets up. But even that thought came with guilt. Would locking it make her the bad guy? Would people think she was childish, controlling? She wasn't trying to shut him out. She was just trying to sleep. She sat down on the edge of the bed, running her hands through her hair. The guilt twisted inside her like a knot she couldn't untie. She loved him. But love wasn't supposed to make you feel trapped in your own home. That night, she couldn't rest. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how a simple door could hold so much meaning. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a boundary, a fragile reminder that she still had control over something, even if it was just her own peace. She remembered when they were newly married, how he'd slip into bed late, careful not to wake her, how he'd bring her coffee in the morning, whispering good morning like a promise. Back then, every small gesture felt like love. Now, those same gestures felt like noise. Somewhere along the way, affection had turned into intrusion. Attention had turned into control. He didn't mean to hurt her, she knew that, but intent didn't erase exhaustion. She wondered how many other couples drift quietly into this kind of resentment, where one partner's habits slowly grind against the other until even kindness feels heavy. No yelling, no big betrayals, just a slow erosion of patience. When did their relationship start to feel like a negotiation? When did her needs become something he could shrug away? She didn't want to argue anymore. She didn't want to explain why being left alone mattered. She just wanted silence. Maybe locking the door would finally make him understand that silence wasn't rejection, it was survival. She could already picture the morning after she did it. He'd wake up, walk down the hall, reach for the handle, and it wouldn't turn. He'd probably knock, at first politely, then a little harder. Maybe he'd call her name. She'd stay quiet. He'd huff, frustrated, and walk away. Or maybe he'd wait outside, angry, waiting for her to unlock it. And when she did, they'd have the same argument they'd had a dozen times before. "You're locking me out of my own room?" "I'm trying to sleep." "You don't need to take it that far." "You didn't stop when I asked." It was always that loop, him defending, her explaining. But this time she wouldn't explain, because this wasn't about the door. It was about being heard, about finally saying, without words, "I can't keep living like this." He probably thought love meant presence, being around her, talking to her, filling every space. But love, real love, sometimes meant stepping back, giving quiet, letting the other person breathe. She thought about all the things she'd stopped doing because she was too tired, reading, painting, even laughing. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional, the slow drip of never being allowed to rest. For her, locking that door wasn't rebellion, it was recovery. And yet, she still felt the ache of guilt. It was strange, loving someone so much that you felt bad for needing space from them. But that was the truth of their marriage now, a constant tug between closeness and suffocation. If she locked the door, she knew what would come next. The sulking, the silence, maybe even the accusation that she didn't love him anymore. But wasn't love also about trust? About believing your partner when they say, "I need this"? The next morning, as dawn crept through the curtains, she sat up in bed and watched the doorknob. Her heart beat faster with every small sound from the hallway. She knew he'd wake soon. She imagined the footsteps, the turn of the handle, the inevitable intrusion. And she realized something. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just tired. There's a kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than sleeplessness. It's the kind that comes from being unseen, unheard, and constantly interrupted. Would she really be the weebta if she chose peace over politeness? If she decided that her rest mattered just as much as his convenience? She thought about every time she'd been told to let it go. Every time he'd said, "It's not that big of a deal." Maybe to him it wasn't, but to her it was everything. She looked again at the door and whispered softly to herself, "It's not about keeping him out. It's about letting myself in." When you love someone, it's easy to believe that compromise means constant access, that marriage means no boundaries. But she was learning that even love needs space. Tomorrow, she'd go out and buy that lock. She'd install it herself if she had to, not to punish him, not to start another argument, but to remind them both that respect isn't given through words, it's shown through restraint. Maybe he'd be angry. Maybe he'd understand. Maybe it would take time. But one thing was certain. If she didn't draw this line now, she'd lose more than sleep. She'd lose herself. She turned off the lamp, exhaled slowly, and sank back into the pillow. The air felt different, lighter somehow, like the room had finally exhaled with her. Tomorrow morning, if he tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. And maybe, for the first time, he'd pause long enough to understand why. Because sometimes love isn't measured by how often you open a door, but by how long you're willing to wait on the other side. And as her eyes closed, for the first time in months, she didn't dread the morning. She welcomed it. Because finally, she knew what peace would sound like. The evening was quiet, filled with the soft hum of game sound effects and the occasional laugh echoing through their headsets. They had played together like this countless times before. It was routine now, comfortable, familiar. She sat curled up in her chair, half focused on the screen, half lost in the story she'd been reading lately. The Throne of Glass series had pulled her back in again, and her thoughts were full of its characters, its twists, its haunting tension. Between rounds, she started talking about it. Her voice carried that animated tone of someone who's completely absorbed in a world no one else can see. She spoke about a certain character, how their presence lingered even when they weren't there. 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. He listened for a second, distracted by his controller, eyes locked on the screen. Then without a pause or second thought, he said, "I don't really care. It's kinda cringe." The words hit harder than they should have. Her voice stopped. Her hands froze mid-motion. For a moment there was only silence on the call, the kind of silence that fills a room after something sharp has been said. He kept playing, unaware of how his tone had landed. But something in the air shifted. She gave a small laugh that didn't sound like her, then fell quiet again. The game continued, but the light mood didn't return. When he asked if everything was okay, she said it was. She didn't want to sound dramatic, but her chest felt tight, her thoughts spinning around the words he'd thrown out so easily. Later that night, after the call ended, she stared at her phone. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like disappointment. She thought about all the times he'd talked about his interests. She didn't always understand them, but she listened anyway. She asked questions. She tried to care because he cared. That was what people did when they liked each other. And now she was wondering if maybe that had only gone one way. She typed a message slowly, hesitating before hitting send. "How would you feel if you were talking about something you enjoyed, and I said I didn't care and thought it was dumb?" It took a few minutes before he replied. He said she was taking it the wrong way, that he didn't mean it like that. He said he only meant cringe in the way people describe things made for younger audiences. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she answered. "It still hurt to hear that from you." He denied ever saying he didn't care, so she reminded him of his exact words. He paused, then said, I meant I haven't read it, so I don't have any context to care. Her heart sank a little further. The explanation didn't make it better. If anything, it made it feel smaller, like her feelings didn't deserve space. She told him that because of how he'd said it, that was how she was always going to process it. After that, he left the message unread. Hours passed, no response. The next morning, a new message appeared, a short apology. He said he thought he had worded it differently, but through the rest of the day, he stayed distant, barely texted. She noticed. He wasn't angry exactly, but the tone was off. When she asked why, he said, "Your reaction didn't really equal what happened." And then, after a pause, added, "You went into an emotional response instead of thinking it another way." She read the words twice, then a third time. Something about them didn't sit right. He wasn't apologizing anymore. He was analyzing her. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she waited until later that night and said they should talk in person. Well, as in person as a call could be. When they finally did, his voice sounded tired. Hers did too. He said he didn't understand why it had become such a big deal. She said it wasn't about the book. It was about how small he'd made her feel in that moment. He said he was just being honest. She said honesty doesn't need to sound like mockery. They both went quiet. He sighed. She could hear it through her headphones. Then, more softly, he said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." She believed him. But she also knew that didn't change what had happened. There were small pauses between each sentence now. Both were careful, like walking over broken glass. She told him she needed space, just for a while. Enough time to think, to clear the noise. He said okay. The call ended, and the quiet that followed felt heavier than the silence the night before. Over the next few days, she tried to focus on her book again. She wanted it to feel like it used to. The excitement, the comfort, the escape. But every time she opened it, the word cringe echoed in the back of her mind. She remembered the tone he used, the way he'd cut her off mid-sentence, the way the laughter had vanished from her chest like air escaping a balloon. It wasn't just a passing comment. It was a moment that cracked something between them. He didn't message for a while. She didn't either. Part of her wanted to, but the other part wanted to see if he'd reach out first. He eventually did. When he called, his voice was quieter than usual. Not defensive, just uncertain. He said he'd been thinking about everything. That maybe he'd said it more harshly than he realized. That he wasn't good at reacting to things he didn't personally relate to. She listened. He sounded sincere. She told him she wasn't angry anymore, but that the whole thing had stuck with her. That sometimes it's not what's said, it's how it's said. He didn't argue this time. He just said, "I get it now." The conversation drifted to other things, slower, softer. There were still gaps, but they didn't feel as sharp. When they hung up, neither of them said, "I love you." Not because they didn't feel it, but because it didn't fit that moment. Days turned into a week. They still talked, but less often. When they did, things felt more careful. She didn't talk much about her books anymore, and he didn't bring them up either. But one night, he sent a picture of a bookstore. Just the front window, taken from his car. The message under it said, "They had your series in the front display." No apology, no explanation, just a small gesture. It was enough to make her smile for the first time in days. When they spoke again later that week, it felt a little lighter. He asked about her reading, not deeply, just a simple, "How's the book going?" But he asked, and that was something. She told him about it again, slower this time, watching for his reaction. He didn't interrupt. He didn't call it cringe. He just listened. The call lasted longer than either expected. For the first time in a while, she laughed, really laughed. And even though things weren't completely fixed, there was a sense that maybe they could be. Because sometimes, it's not one big moment that defines a relationship. It's 100 small ones. Some that hurt, some that heal. The night ended quietly. The last thing he said before they hung up was, "I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't know if he would, but when her phone lit up the next day with his name, she felt something inside her settle. Over time, the tension faded. They still had their differences, but he tried harder to listen. She noticed. He'd ask questions about her books, about the stories she liked. He still didn't read them, but he didn't have to. It wasn't perfect. Some days were easier than others, but the distance between them slowly began to close. Months later, they were at a small cafe together. She was reading again as usual, a paperback open on the table beside her coffee. He reached over, flipped the book around, and read the title. "That the one you were talking about?" he asked. She nodded. He smiled. "Doesn't sound cringe to me." She looked up, caught off guard for a second, then laughed. Maybe he meant it as a joke, or maybe he meant it as something else. Either way, the warmth that came with it was real. He reached across the table, brushed his fingers over her hand. The moment was small, so small it might not have mattered to anyone else. But to her, it did. Because this time, when she talked, he listened. And that was enough. The game nights came back. The easy rhythm returned. They still teased each other, still had their moments of frustration. But something subtle had changed in the way they spoke. The pauses between words were softer. The tone was gentler. She never forgot that night when he called her books cringe. It became one of those memories that lives quietly in the background, something that hurt once but doesn't sting anymore. And whenever he caught her reading now, he'd ask how far she'd gotten or who her favorite character was. She'd tell him. He'd nod, half understanding, but smiling anyway. Sometimes, that was enough. She was 16 when her life narrowed to a single room and a single sound. While classmates traded playlists and practiced parallel parking, she learned to flush lines, tape tubing, and set alarms on a gray machine that hummed through the walls like weather. Her stepmother's kidneys had failed without ceremony. The living room turned clinical, bright with soft LEDs and the sterile sweetness of antiseptic. Her father hauled freight on long routes. He came home in snapshots that smelled like diesel and coffee, then disappeared again into distance. Someone had to be home. That someone was her. She left the diner job with a nod and a quiet apology. The manager folded her apron and told her the door would be open if life ever did her a kindness. 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. Time learned new names. There was medication time, flush time, nap time, appointment time, the slow hour when the machine whirred like a low tide. When her phone lit with invitations, she silenced it. Eventually, it stopped lighting. Friends drifted toward campuses, road trips, and ordinary pictures. She edited her world down to lists on the fridge. Her stepmother tried to be gracious, and most days she was. Pain, however, is grammar built of fragments. It broke sentences into sharp syllables, then left apologies like loose threads. The girl poured water, adjusted pillows, and learned the art of leaving a room before words could bruise. Then the call arrived that felt like sunrise under a door. A donor. A real match. Her father cried on the porch and called it dust. The girl stood still and listened to hope breaking its long fast. The surgery worked. The machine rolled out like a retired guard. Her stepmother came home thinner but lighter, newly particular about oranges and morning light. Soup replaced the smell of bleach. Laughter misstepped through hallways that had forgotten the tune. She was 18 and ready to turn noise into motion. She took a job stacking grocery aisles into small geographies of order and price. She saved in a jar that lived behind sweaters, a secret clink that sounded like exit music. Her father told her she could stay forever if she kept working and didn't drift. It felt like generosity resting on a leash. She met him in a midnight forum about secondhand furniture and stayed for his careful humor. Their voices learned each other's edges long before their hands did. When they finally met, Bus station coffee, 2 shy waves. The city felt possible. He lived 2 states away in a room with thin walls and patience. When his lease ended, they said the word together, try. She found cheap listings with ceilings like bread about to fall. His budget met hers like 2 palms pressed through a window. Her father scrolled through photos and shook his head at bars on windows and paint peeling like sunburn. Her stepmother asked about locks, about neighbors, about the certainty of night. The compromise came dressed as kindness. Stay here, both of you. Save faster, move later. He moved in on quiet feet. He carried a duffel that did not complain and bought a plant that did. He thanked her stepmother for stew, scrubbed pans, and stacked his shoes out of traffic. It did not matter. The house learned a new tension. The comments were small at first. Longer showers, louder doors, lighter paychecks. They grew larger in the dark. By August, she chose a date. End of October, they would go. The lease they signed was honest about its flaws. Her parents nodded with a relief that sounded like impatience, as if their blessing had somewhere else to be. Then her stepmother forgot a pot on a cold burner and laughed at her own clumsiness. She lost a word and replaced it with a shrug. She began to drag her right foot. A scan made the quiet official, a frontal lobe tumor, aggressive, predicting a map no one wished to read. The doctor spoke gently. The calendar did not. All the old expectations returned like furniture uncovered. You'll stay, they said. She'll need hands. Quit for a while. Be here. The girl breathed, nodded, made soup. She shortened her shifts and lengthened her lists. She learned the new rhythm. Clear mornings that crumbled, afternoons that wandered, nights that repeated questions like prayers. At night, she packed. A book, 2 mugs, the plant's stubborn green, the jar of savings that looked smaller in the light. Her boyfriend taped boxes and did not lecture. He named the rooms in the new place as if names might hold walls straight. The last week of October arrived like a clock finishing a sentence. She sat with her father at the table marked by years of hot mugs. "We're moving Saturday," she said. "Now?" he asked, not unkind, disbelieving. "Now," she said. He called her cruel without using the word. She explained without defending. They fell silent, 2 people holding a rope from different ends. On Friday, she combed her stepmother's hair and said she would go in the morning. "Good," her stepmother answered. Go while going is still a choice. The girl folded the comb into a drawer and tried to memorize the exact warmth of the hand she was holding. Morning came careful and gray. She wrote a note of visiting hours and grocery plans, set it beside the fruit bowl, and lifted the stuck door until it let go. Outside, the car looked smaller under boxes. Her boyfriend locked the plant between paper and air and said ready without question marks. They drove. The old house shrank into a story. Hills held their breath in rust and gold. She kept her hands still in her lap and let silence be the truest thing offered. The apartment door stuck unless you lifted it a gentle inch. The window clicked at odd hours. The refrigerator hummed like a file of bees. They made a bed. The frame protested like an old man in weather. A lamp found them a corner of warm. They ate noodles from the pot and invented where the cups would live. That night she stood at the window and watched the city speak in small languages. Dog tags, bus breaks, a radio 2 floors down, repeating a chorus it loved too much. Air moved all the way to the top of her lungs. It felt like standing at the edge of a lake and remembering you could float. The weeks began to braid themselves. On weekdays, she rode buses with stubborn schedules and learned the mathematics of rent. On weekends, she returned to the old house with groceries and patient time. She learned how to hold 2 truths without tearing. She was gone, she was not abandoning. Her father learned how to say thank you into his sleeve. They constructed a truce out of calendars. Her stepmother's world shrank to a chair, a window, and a handful of strong memories that arrived out of order. Some days she was bright and curious, asking whether the neighbor's radio still overused the same cord. Some days she watched dust and called it snow. The girl answered both with the same voice. Winter slid in. The apartment learned their steps and stopped protesting. The plant leaned toward the south like a small believer. She discovered the kindness of a kettle that clicks when ready. She stored small joys in kitchen drawers with the rubber bands. One evening she returned late and found her father on the porch with 2 mugs and a silence that looked like a bridge. He asked if the window still rattled in wind. She said yes, and that she minded less than she expected. He nodded as if he had been given a map. They did not solve anything. They shared hot water until steam stopped pretending. On a Tuesday, her stepmother asked whether the new place sounded different. The girl said yes. It sounded like a clock that belonged to her. The woman smiled in a way that forgave nothing and blessed much. "Take the oranges," she said later. "They're too bright to leave behind." She took them, and she took the bus, and she took the evening like medicine that did not taste awful. Some nights grief knocked like the building inspector. She let it in and gave it a chair. Some mornings relief rang the bell and waited while she found keys. She learned the difference between loneliness and space. She discovered she could sleep through her own breathing. She did not count the days left. She counted pills, receipts, and the buses she could catch at 20 after. She learned the trick of stepping over the squeaky board when she carried memories through the dark. She kept the plant alive. By late winter, the apartment felt less like a borrowed coat. The neighbors' names found her. The city learned her silhouette. She hung a cheap curtain and called it a door between rooms. She taped 2 photographs to the fridge, a bus ticket and a bowl of oranges lit like small suns. One afternoon, her father texted, "She smiled today." The girl replied with a picture of steam above soup. Later, she stood by the window with the plant and said out loud, just to hear it, "Here." The word filled the room without echo. Spring would come when it was ready. For now, the radiator ticked like old applause, and the city dimmed toward evening. She washed 2 bowls, dried them on a towel that shed thread, and let the quiet belong to her without apology. He never thought a single yes would cost him this much. When Ethan got the wedding invitation from his younger brother, he didn't hesitate. Of course he'd be there. It was family. His kid brother getting married at a lakeside resort in Colorado. 5 days of celebration, laughter, photos, speeches, memories. The kind of thing their parents would talk about for the rest of their lives. He imagined it already. His mom crying during the vows, his dad trying to hold it together, his brother grinning like an idiot. It was going to be perfect. Except his wife couldn't go. Maya worked at a regional bank in Denver. Nothing glamorous, but steady. The kind of job that ran on numbers, policies, and red tape. And November was audit month. No time off, no exceptions. 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. She told him gently, like she'd practiced it. There's just no way I can get leave right now. I'm sorry. He said it was fine, that he understood. But that night, while they ate takeout in silence, he caught her staring at her phone, eyes somewhere far away. He tried to sound casual. "You sure you're okay with me going?" She nodded, almost too quickly. "It's your brother's wedding, Ethan. You can't skip that." Her tone was soft, but her expression was unreadable. For 2 days, he went back and forth. Stay home and miss the wedding? Or go and risk her feeling left out? Every option felt wrong. On the 3rd morning, he texted his brother, "I'll be there." Maya didn't argue. She just said, "That's good," and went back to checking emails. He bought her favorite chocolate before leaving, hoping the small gesture would say what he couldn't. She smiled politely and placed the box on the counter, unopened. The drive took 8 hours. The farther he got from home, the more the road stretched like a quiet warning. But the scenery was stunning. The mountains, the pines, the crisp air. By the time he reached the resort, his chest felt lighter. His brother Ryan greeted him in the parking lot with that same grin he'd worn since childhood. The family was all there, buzzing with excitement. Everyone hugged him, asked about Maya, said how much they wished she'd come. He gave the same rehearsed answer. Couldn't get time off. You know how her job is. He smiled each time, but inside it stung a little more. That night after dinner, fireworks lit up the lake. Ryan and his fiancée danced under string lights while the family cheered. Ethan stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching the reflection of the lights on the water. He thought about calling Maya. He even pulled his phone out. But it was late. He put it back in his pocket. By the second day, everyone had settled into the rhythm of celebration. Breakfasts, decorations, rehearsals, photos. Ethan went along with it, smiling when cameras turned his way, laughing at jokes that barely landed. Every once in a while, someone asked, "You must miss Maya, huh?" He'd laugh and nod. Yeah, a lot. But when he got back to his room at night, the silence hit him. No calls, no texts, not even a good night. On the third night, he finally typed, "Everything's going great, I miss you." Then he deleted it. It sounded like he was fishing for reassurance. He tried again. "You'd have loved it here." Deleted that too. He ended up sending a heart emoji. She didn't reply. The wedding day came. Big smiles, perfect weather, everything according to plan. Ryan looked nervous and happy all at once. Ethan helped him straighten his tie, cracked a joke about not running away, and for a brief second, forgot everything else. Then the ceremony started. When the music swelled and everyone turned to see the bride walk down the aisle, Ethan looked at his parents, his brother, the guests, and for no reason he could explain, he thought of Maya sitting at her desk, eyes fixed on a computer screen, another quiet workday. He wanted to share this moment with her, the laughter, the emotion, the way everyone teared up during the vows. But when he pulled out his phone to take a photo, the thought of sending it to her felt hollow. That night, the celebration roared on, dancing, drinking, laughter echoing down the hallways. Ethan slipped out early and sat alone on the balcony of his room, phone in hand, screen blank. Still nothing from her. 2 days later, he drove back home. The house was spotless, lights dimmed, soft jazz playing from the speaker. Maya opened the door, smiled faintly, and said, "Hey." It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either. He set his bag down. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah," she said. "How was it?" "Good. Really good. You were missed." She nodded and went back to the kitchen. He waited for her to ask about the wedding. Who was there? How it looked? What the place was like? She didn't. Over dinner, she talked about work, a client issue, some new manager. When he brought up the wedding photos, she just said, "That's nice," and changed the subject. It was like the wedding had happened on another planet. Days passed. The silence didn't break. It just settled deeper. She stopped replying in the family group chat when someone sent pictures. She skipped his mother's calls. When he finally asked, "Are you mad at me?" she said, "Why would I be?" He pressed, "Because I went." She turned off the lamp beside the bed. "You did what you thought was right." That sentence stuck in his head like a splinter. The next morning, she left early for work. He sat at the table with his coffee, scrolling through the wedding pictures again. There was one shot, him and Ryan laughing with their arms around each other. Everyone looked happy. He zoomed in on his own face and saw it. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Later that afternoon, he sent her that photo. This one turned out nice. Hours later, her reply came, "Yeah, looks like you had fun." That night, he realized something had shifted. Not broken exactly, just slipped out of place. A week passed. The wedding buzz faded for everyone else, but not for him. At home, every small thing felt slightly off. The tone of her voice, the pauses, the quiet. When his parents visited, his mom asked, "Everything okay between you two?" He smiled. "Yeah, just tired." But when they left, the smile disappeared. He tried. He really did. He made dinner, brought flowers, talked about taking a short trip. She smiled, said thanks, and went back to her emails. It wasn't anger. It was indifference. On her birthday, he planned everything. Candles, her favorite food, a quiet dinner. She came home late, thanked him, sat down, and ate in silence. Halfway through, he asked, "Do you regret that I went?" She looked up for the first time that night. "No, you had to go. It was your brother's wedding." He nodded. Relief flickered for a second, until she added softly, "I just didn't think it would feel like losing something." He froze. "Losing what?" She looked down at her plate. "Don't worry about it." After that, even silence started to feel crowded. A few nights later, he came home early and found her on a video call, laughing with someone from work. He hadn't heard her laugh like that in weeks. It hit him. Not jealousy, just realization. The sound of her voice reminded him of what was gone. Later that night, he lay awake beside her. She fell asleep easily. He didn't. He reached for his phone, scrolled through old photos. College trips, their first apartment, their wedding. Every image felt like a different version of them. The next morning, over breakfast, he finally said, "We can't keep pretending everything's fine." She didn't look up. "I'm not pretending." "Then tell me what's wrong." She set her coffee down, quiet for a moment. Then, "It's not about the wedding, Ethan. It's about how easy it was for you to go. How quickly you accepted I wouldn't be there." He stared at her. What was I supposed to do? Stay home and disappoint everyone? "I don't know," she said. "Maybe just care enough to question it." The words hung in the air, heavy and real. That evening, he sat alone on the couch, phone glowing in his hand. He opened the wedding video. Laughter, clinking glasses, the same smiles that now looked distant. He watched his brother's happiness, then paused on his own face. He looked elsewhere. Days turned into weeks. The silence became normal. Then one night, while washing dishes, Maya said casually, "My boss approved a week off next month." He smiled. "That's great. Maybe we can... I'm going to visit my parents." The rest of the sentence died in his throat. "Yeah, sure, that's good." When she left, the house felt even quieter. She called after a few days, short check-ins, nothing personal. He could hear the calm in her voice, a different kind of peace. When she came back a week later, the first thing she said was, "I think we need a break." He didn't argue, he just nodded. Later, when she was asleep, he scrolled through his gallery again. He found a short clip from the wedding, Ryan laughing, his parents clapping, music in the background. Then he saw himself in the frame, smiling, yes, but not really there. He saved the video to a new folder and renamed it Before. Now, months later, he still talks to his family, still goes to work, still laughs when he has to. But every time someone mentions weddings, vacations, or family events, he just nods politely. Because he knows that some moments don't end when the event is over. Sometimes they just echo, in the spaces where someone should have been, in the silence that follows, in the realization that love can fade quietly, not with fights or betrayal, but with one decision that felt right at the time. And every time he thinks about that week in Colorado, the noise, the joy, the lake lights, he remembers how beautiful it all looked, and how empty it felt without her. It started with a sound she barely noticed, a faint notification chime from her phone that blended with the hum of the refrigerator. Claire was rinsing her coffee mug when it went off, the kind of small digital beep that usually meant nothing. But this time, it did. She reached for the phone without thinking. Her thumb hovered over the screen before she opened the email. The subject line looked ordinary, almost dull. Low balance alert. Ethan's lunch account. It took her a few seconds to understand what she was reading. Low balance? That couldn't be right. She had just funded the account in August, a full $1,000. enough to last through the entire school year with extra to spare. It was October. There should still be hundreds left. 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. The email was blunt. Current balance, 47.80. She read it twice, certain she'd missed something. Then she just stood there, the warm mug cooling in her hands, staring at the message. The number didn't change. -47. The coffee suddenly smelled bitter. When Ethan came home that evening, the house was calm, the kind of quiet that pretends to be peace. The twins were upstairs, their laughter muffled by closed doors. The TV murmured from the living room. Claire sat at the kitchen counter with her phone in her hand. She waited until Ethan walked in and dropped his backpack by the door. "Hey," she said, her tone casual but edged. "Got a weird email today." He glanced up from untying his shoes. "Yeah? Your lunch account," she said. "It's negative." He looked at her for a second, confused. "That doesn't make sense. You put in 1,000. "I did," she said softly. "And it's gone." The pause stretched. He blinked, then frowned. "I mean, I've been getting breakfast there sometimes. It's easier than rushing at home." "Easier?" Claire repeated. "Breakfast? Every day?" "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "Just something small, a bagel or whatever. I didn't think it'd be that much." "A bagel there is $8, she said. "An energy drink is $5. You've been eating at the cafe and hitting vending machines every morning. I checked." He looked away, jaw tight. "I didn't know it added up that fast." She exhaled, the disappointment heavy in her chest. "That money was supposed to last until June?" He said nothing. The quiet settled between them like dust. That night, after everyone went to bed, Claire opened her laptop and logged into the school's portal. The list of charges filled the screen like a confession. Each line carried a date, time, and small dollar amount that told its own story. Pastries, bottled drinks, wraps, snacks, energy shots. Every school day since the semester began. She scrolled through the weeks, the total rising, her stomach tightening. He'd burned through $900 in 2 months. Claire sat back, staring at the screen. She thought of the day she'd made the deposits. She'd gathered all 3 kids in the kitchen and explained the new system clearly. "This money is for lunch only. It needs to last all year." They'd nodded. Even Ethan. Patient. Responsible Ethan. The one who had saved for months to buy his own computer last summer. She'd trusted him. And maybe that was the part that stung most. Not the money, but the easy confidence with which she'd believed he could handle it. The next morning, she waited until he came downstairs, sleepy and distracted, a granola bar in hand. The kitchen was filled with the cold light of early dawn. "Ethan," she said quietly, "we need to fix your account." He gave a short nod. "Yeah, I'll stop buying breakfast there." "That's not enough," she said. "You're going to pay for the rest of the year yourself." He froze, halfway to the door. "What?" "You heard me," she said. "You have a job. You have savings. I'm not giving you more money for that account. If you want to eat at school, you'll cover it." He stared at her, disbelief mixing with anger. "You're serious?" "I'm serious." He shook his head slowly. "That's not fair." "Neither was wasting $1,000, she said, her voice calm but final. He said nothing. He just picked up his backpack and left without another word. That evening, he didn't come home for dinner. His phone went straight to voicemail. Claire didn't panic. She knew he'd probably gone to work at the electronics store. But she felt the silence around her stretching thin. The twins noticed too. One of them asked if Ethan was in trouble. She told them no. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Ethan packed lunches from home, mostly leftovers or sandwiches. The cafe charges stopped entirely. He still wouldn't talk much. When Friday arrived, Claire received a text from her ex-husband. "Ethan told me you're making him pay for school lunch." "Seriously?" She didn't respond at first. Later, she wrote back, "He spent it. He fixes it." The reply came quick. "He's a kid, Claire. Let it go." She stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone down. Let it go. That was easy to say from the outside. That night, after the kids went to bed, Claire stood in the kitchen alone. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space again, soft and constant. She looked at the lunchbox sitting by the sink, the one she used to pack for Ethan when he was little. It was metal, scratched at the corners, a superhero logo fading from years of use. Back then, he used to complain if she forgot to cut the crust off his sandwiches. Now he barely looked at her. A week later, she noticed something new in the account, a deposit. $50. Not from her, from him. He'd used his own money. The sight made her chest tighten with something complicated, pride mixed with sadness. She hadn't expected him to do it that quickly. He'd gone to work, probably picked up an extra shift, and paid it off without a word. At dinner that night, she didn't mention it. The twins chatted about a school project. Ethan ate quietly, eyes down. The air between them was polite, thin, fragile. She almost broke the silence, but didn't. Days became weeks. The school year rolled on. The balance stayed stable. No new alerts, no surprises. But something in the rhythm of the house had changed. Ethan had grown careful, not just with money, but with everything. He packed his own lunches now, made his own breakfast, drove himself to school. He stopped asking for cash entirely. One afternoon, Claire stopped by the electronics store after work. She hadn't planned to. It was just on her way home. Through the window, she saw him restocking shelves, his uniform polo tucked in neatly. He looked older somehow, focused, tired in a way that seemed new. She didn't go in. She just watched for a moment, then turned back to her car. At home, the house was quiet again. The twins were doing homework. The light through the window caught the edge of the kitchen table, the same place she'd once set down her laptop to check that account. For a moment, she imagined that email popping up again, that sinking feeling of disbelief. Then she shook it off. Winter came early that year. The mornings were darker, colder. She noticed Ethan started leaving earlier for school, sometimes before anyone else was awake. Once, she caught him slipping out, thermos in hand, a packed lunch under his arm. He didn't see her watching from the stairs. On Christmas morning, the house smelled of cinnamon rolls and pine. The kids unwrapped gifts while music played softly in the background. When it was Ethan's turn, he opened a small envelope from Claire. Inside was a handwritten note and a single folded receipt, a confirmation that his lunch account had been refilled for the next semester. He looked up slowly, uncertain. She smiled faintly. "It's covered. Don't overdo it this time." He nodded once. "I won't." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. Just an exchange, brief, unspoken, enough. Months passed. The snow melted, spring crept into the air, and life in the house found its rhythm again. Ethan was busier than ever. School, work, practices, always moving. The balance stayed steady. By May, the whole thing had faded into memory. Claire barely thought about it anymore. Until one afternoon, she got a call from the school's office. Her stomach dropped at the sound of the number on the screen. But when she answered, the voice on the other end was cheerful. "Just letting you know," the woman said. "Ethan's account is still in good standing. He's one of the few students who never missed a payment this semester." Claire laughed quietly, more from relief than anything else. "That's good to hear." She hung up and stood by the window for a long moment, watching the soft wind move the leaves outside. That night, Ethan came home late from work, hair tousled, shoes muddy. He grabbed a snack from the fridge and leaned against the counter. Claire watched him for a moment before speaking. "You're doing all right?" He looked up. "Yeah. Why?" She smiled faintly. "You just seem older lately." He shrugged, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess I had to be." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The house grew quiet again, but this time it didn't feel heavy, just still. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, Claire sat alone in the dim kitchen, phone in hand. She scrolled through her old emails until she found it, the one from months ago, the one that had started everything. Low balance alert. She hovered over it, then deleted it without opening it. She hovered over it, then deleted it without opening it. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, warm and soft, like the beginning of something ordinary. Thanks for watching Story Frame. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more updates. See you in the next video.